And I would argue it's the single biggest combat sports fight anywhere happening. I know that's going to bristle some folks thinking Jones versus Stipe is bigger. I actually don't think it is. But it all kind of gets to a different kind of question, BC, which is this is what somebody has been asking me, and I actually think it's worth thinking about. What exactly is Jake Paul trying to achieve in boxing, and what does a win over Mike Tyson do to get him there?
It's weird because before this Mike fight came to fruition and we saw Jake Paul in back-to-back. Who was his most recent fight? His most recent fight was Mike Perry. Before that, it was back-to-back prospect series main events against
Andre August, I think Paul Bouchard.
Yeah, against, ex-boxers who weren't active, who have decent records. And at that point, it was like, Jake's interviews were like, hey, I'm a year or two away from becoming a legitimate cruiserweight champion. And then the Mike thing fell back into his lap. And I think it was the right event at the right time to put Jake on the path of who he really is. The greatest celebrity crossover boxer of our time and the face of this crossover bubble that you can argue him and his brother started. And certainly Mike Tyson put a lot of air into that in 2020 when he boxed Roy Jones and came back and Triller made a lot of money and it was a big pandemic hit. So I think he's back on that lane and should stay on that lane. So what does this fight represent? The ultimate pinch himself. Oh shit, look what I just did. I mean, look, you said it could be the biggest sport. Dude, this is the biggest sporting event of the year in combat by a mile in terms of people's attention. I mean, we'll see what
I think you're right.
We'll see what the final metrics are. Devil, risk taker, like already living the dream of who he became as a YouTube celebrity / actor / whatever else he's into at the moment. The fighting thing kind of fell in his lap. He went all in on it. And what's the biggest thing he can do? Fight Mike Tyson on Netflix? Yeah, that's probably it. So for him, even though this is a case where he's very much the favorite and we're, expecting the worst here of what he could do to Mike in a lot of ways, this is the biggest Super Bowl he could get from the idea of doubling and tripling his stardom, making a shit ton of money, doing a massive event on Netflix that everybody's mom and grandma is talking about. But I also think this potentially gets him closer to what I think is his real cash out, which is not winning, in my opinion, winning a real world title and going up against a real ranked guy, but this belief in his eyes that, like, if there's anything as big or in the same ballpark, it's fighting Canelo, which just means fighting the biggest boxing star of the moment. I think this makes that easier to happen in some ways. Canelo's getting older. He's not matching himself as aggressively. I'm not saying I want this fighter than anybody should,
be
but
careful.
I think that Jake is just getting to a point where it's like, He couldn't say no to Mike Tyson. None of us can say no. We're going to tune in no matter what, even if we're against it or even if we're afraid or whatever. It's like the biggest cultural event he can create outside of fighting his brother, which who knows, they may pull that card one day. It's fighting 58-year-old Mike Tyson. It's fighting somebody that would bring in all the eyeballs, half the people afraid he's going to die in the ring, and the other half thinking, oh, he should be able to knock this YouTuber out, right? Which is really the selling point of this fight. So I think for Jake, it's just taking him to the end of the game. How big can he get as a crossover fighter that's bringing in the eyeballs and the money? And if we have to give Jake credit for one thing outside of being the face of this crossover bubble that's still alive, is he's bringing a lot of young fans into this. And this fight will bring in young and old all across the board. But I think it does get him closer to, like, what is his true ceiling? Is it winning a world title? I mean, could he get ranked and get an WBC, people like that, they're waiting to put him in a title fight tomorrow. I just don't think he will stay in that lane and get those requisite wins. I think he'll stay in this lane, but could this lane lead him to that giant cash out of whoever the biggest star in the moment is in boxing? Probably still Canelo in a couple of years. I think it does get him closer to that. I'm not saying I'm into that, but look, what has Jake been all about? Taking big chances, pinching himself, him and his brother, and saying, look at us. One of us is in WWE, the other one is fighting Mike Tyson. I mean, look, it's been a pretty crazy ride, love or hate Jake, that we're actually here. Like, look, from where he started, that we're actually here. This could be could this be the biggest sports event of the year? No.
I mean,
not
Super
even
Bowl
close to
and
that
Copa
stuff.
America final was.
But like, we can't underestimate, to your point, what this is. So, do they have a responsibility to entertain us? That's my big question.
Okay, so I want to get to that in a minute, but I think I have a way to describe what Jake Paul is trying to do. Tell me if you think this is close or not. It is not that Jake Paul doesn't care about getting some legitimacy from the legitimacy granting architecture of boxing, a belt, a world title, decent ranking. Some of that is definitely important, and some of that are things he is looking for. But what he's really looking for, what is Jake Paul trying to get out of boxing? He is trying to become the highest paid, biggest attraction in the sport of boxing, ... without necessarily having all of those credentials to do it.
Sure.
That is the goal. He wants to be the guy.
How do you cut the line? Do this.
How do you cut the line? How do you, and by the way, when we say cut the line, it's like he's creating the terms of his own line to get here. And it's weird, and I don't know if it's going to work.
That's interesting. As much as everyone's making this event about Mike, and in a lot of ways, storyline-wise, it's
the
Jake
Paul
getting
story.
to the very
So
top.
I did this thing. I didn't know much about the channel. I found out a little bit afterwards, but I did like a 5-minute segment on this channel called News Nation. It's like an 80 million homes. It's supposed to be nominally centrist. I think it's not, but neither. It doesn't matter. They had me on for like a sports segment, and I remember the producer asked me ahead of time because sometimes they screen you ahead of time.
Yeah.
And the producer and then the host asked me the same question. They're like, "Is Mike just in this for a money grab?" And I'm like, I don't know how to answer that, lady. Like, that's what the sport is. Like, what does that mean? Like, you're in it for the money. That's what that's all that they do. Like, I don't know how to answer that question exactly. Like, you think he's in this because he's like desperate to beat Jake Paul and some kind of like my career depends on it kind of thing? I don't think that's right. I do think he's trying to win, but yeah, of course he's trying to get paid. This is the Jake Paul story. He is facilitating a very basic need. And all right, let's be clear about this. I've said this before. How many times have you heard a Jake Paul opponent complain about their pay? Never. It doesn't happen. It doesn't exist. You can hate who the guy is and call this fight stupid. Both of those things are fair to say. But the reality is when people are like, well, is Mike in it for the money? Yeah, motherfucker, that's the name of the game. What kind of a statement is that? But Jake Paul, to your point, is kind of the center, the nucleus of this entire operation. Now, if he loses and like, oh my God, if he gets viciously KO'd, well, then the whole thing is like terribly imperiled at that point. I'm not even sure what rehab would look like.
Are you suggesting that if Jake Paul gets knocked out by Mike Tyson, that his entire boxing career and ability to draw is shot and done?
I don't think that. No.
But
I think, for example, we had talked to him. When did we interview him in Florida? So that was the second Woodley fight.
Yes.
And we sat down with Jake. And we asked him, like, what's your goal here? And he was like, I want to get a fight against Canelo. And both of us kind of fucking laughed in his face about it. We weren't trying to be mean, but, like, it was our gut reaction. It sounded so ludicrous. And I want to be clear, I still think it's pretty ludicrous, or at least it's hard to see that happening anytime soon. We'll see it on the line.
Isn't Canelo making us feel like he's getting closer to that? I mean,
okay, but Canelo would still fuck him up proper.
Yes.
That's the problem.
Yes.
Like, he would still.
But the point is, can Jake use this fight to become an even deeper heel and make mad so many casual fans that they will then go out of their way to follow him on pay-per-view and pay to see him lose?
Yes.
And then that's the only way the Canelo payoff would make sense.
He got the real big significant lift picking a fight with MMA.
Sure.
And he had that kind of failed attempt against Tommy Fury. But if he can pick a fight against boxing in a way, so to speak, where I'm going to like do the same model you did against the MMA guys, get the older guys, kind of washed, whatever, but still adored, big name, and then go beat the shit out of them. Do that in boxing. Now you got to play.
It's like pro wrestling heel 101. It's perfect.
But this is my point. It's like, well, let's do this. Let me play a couple of assets here from Mike Tyson because he's doing, I think, I wouldn't say a great job promoting this fight, but I definitely wouldn't say a bad one. Netflix is trying to make him sound cool. They're trying to give you the Mike Tyson experience. Listen to the warning that he sends to Jake Paul.
Final thing, I presume that Mike Tyson is watching this right now. Is there anything you want to say to him?
Mike, I love you, but this is my sport now. It's an honor to get in the ring with you. I'm so honored you're a legend, but I'm going to take your throne, brother.
There's a fundamental difference between me and Jake. He's a manufactured killer. Television and paper made him a killer. He's manufactured. I'm a natural born killer. That's the difference.
I mean, it's a great soundbite.
Okay, that's terrifying.
I mean, it is, and I saw a lot of people celebrate that on Twitter. I'm not trying to say it wasn't cool. I'm not trying to say it wasn't like an apropos summation of what's really happening here. Like, no, Mike Tyson and Jake Paul are not on the same level of toughness, any of that. That's why the only way this fight would work, and that's what Nikisa always says of MVP Promotions, and he's right. This fight only works because Mike is the sage and Jake is the young buck. But I don't know. Am I wrong to field that soundbite and go, okay, but it's not a street or bar fight? And if it was, yeah, Mike will probably eat your heart out, right? it's still a boxing match against a guy 30 years younger with size advantages and a lot going on there. So that helps sell it, Luke. But I don't know. You got to get me off of this soapbox of bad feeling for this fight. I want you to become the cheerleader
bad
for this
for boxing
fight.
or good for boxing or neutral for
No,
boxing?
I'm not one that believes it's bad for boxing. Could it be bad for boxing? Yeah. If Mike gets flatlined and has health problems coming off of this, then
Yes, that could be
the
bad.
worst
Yes.
case scenario. And suddenly, even though this has very little to do with real boxing, it becomes, a poster of what's wrong with it. I think it can help boxing in some ways with the Netflix connection, which was something when this fight was announced that you were rightfully sort of on, like, what does this mean and all of that. But it's separate from that to me in a lot of ways. I don't know. I wanted you to get me off of because normally you're the cantankerous one, the
Yes,
pessimistic
truly.
one, the realist, so to speak. I don't know why I've fallen in the sour gutter on this fight. Probably because it's 58-year-old Mike Tyson fighting, but I'm just as worried that the worst case scenario with putting a man in the ring at this age happens as I am with this being a waste of our time. I'm not trying to say
It is a waste of our
choreographed
time.
pro wrestling match that's stealing money from people. I'm not going that far. But do you think there's any silent contract, as Teddy Atlas used to say in this, or any understanding between the two of them that, like, they're not really here to hurt each other and this could go the way of, like, dance routine? Or should I put that behind me, get ready, and watch whatever slop in 14-ounce gloves they can give me?
I don't think you can commit to that until you see the fight itself.
Because obviously there's ways the fight's
way
fun,
to
but
know. There's no way to know. This fight could be good for what it is. This fight could be bad for what it is. But is there some kind of silent contract, to your point, to dictate the terms? I don't in any way want to dismiss it, but we just have to see how it looks first. I think that's all I'm saying. Long Island Luke, do you have people in your orbit hitting you up about this fight?
Yeah, like random people who don't watch combat sports at all have definitely been hitting me up about it. I asked these guys back here, Nadir and Ken, who don't watch, and they said they're definitely going to tune in. So